Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar on leadership and how leadership affects the menopause. It's hosted by Verve Healthcare. Verve Healthcare are a preventative and proactive health and wellbeing provider. And as part of the Institute of Leadership Week, we are really delighted to be doing this webinar on menopause and how leadership can affect the menopause. And I'm really pleased to be joined by Emma from Bodyline Clinic, who is an absolute guru on anything to do with the menopause. So Emma, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. So tell us about the size of the problem at the moment.
Well, I think, we've seen so much in the press in the last couple of years. I know that more and more menopause is on everybody's lips, but the actual sort of solutions for both workplaces and treatment from the NHS are really kind of yet to be really properly seen. There is some major concerns over women suffering. Again, press, different things. You've seen, at least 1 in 10 women are leaving their job because of menopause symptoms, and 4 in 10 are thinking about it. So I would say the size of the problem is pretty big, and it's over half the population. And yet, and a very large proportion of companies' workforces are women between the ages of 45 and 55, which is around about the sort of time where menopause can start showing its face. And averagely 51 is the age of women going through menopause. So yeah, it's a very big problem indeed.
Absolutely. And I think when you talk about the ages of women when they go through this, they're at their prime in their career, aren't they? Between 45 and 55, they've worked very hard to get to where they are. A lot of people are in leadership positions, and I suppose it's if you think about the other things that are going on in their lives as well. They've probably got children that are growing up, potentially off to university, potentially moving out. They may well have elderly parents that are, they're having to care for. They've probably also been in a relationship with their partner for, almost, a substantial amount of their life. Exactly. And that relationship is changing as well, isn't it? Yes. And on top of all of that, you've got to deal with this. Yeah. So, how is it emotionally affecting women, all of that happening at the same time?
Well, I mean, when we were talking about doing this, we talked about it. I mean, I'm actually in that now, and I know that you're not there yet.
Not just yet, no.
Not just there. But I'm definitely at the age of 54, and you feel sandwiched, and I think it is known as the sandwich generation. You have pubescent children who are going through a massive hormonal change, and then you're yourself included, and then dealing with the old age and your parents. It can be a really challenging time. I describe it sometimes as everybody wants a piece of you, and then you've got to do a good job on top of that with your career, especially if you're in a leadership role. It can be completely overwhelming when you feel some of the symptoms that you get in menopause. You can feel like you're a different person. You often see personality kind of character traits that you've never recognized before and you've never seen in yourself before. And so it can be a really frightening time and completely overwhelming, so much so that it can cause really serious anxieties about things that you just wouldn't have worried about before. So and as well, trying to keep your relationship together, being a mum, guidance, as well as achieving and doing what you need to do at work. It's a very challenging time, and I think it affects not just the women. And I think that's what some people don't realize. It isn't just women that this affects. It does affect the men in work as well, and leaders in the workplace.
Absolutely. And so you've got all of that going on at home, and you've also got to do a job at the same time, and so everything that you said obviously affects how people work. It affects the business itself. So what are the effects on businesses of women going through the menopause?
Well, there's a number, and I think again the well-being agenda is being addressed, and I think mental health and the discussions around mental health have become incredibly important in workplaces. But of course, it's got to be down to absenteeism, the impact on productivity, and ultimately culture, the feeling of enjoying their work and coming together. And if there's issues, then that will affect that. But I feel the biggest issue probably for companies that it's unseen is presenteeism. So when a woman is coming into work and she is not feeling herself, she doesn't feel like she can talk about it because the environment is not conducive to that, then she will not perform at her best. And that is going to impact not only her, but her team, her other colleagues, her peers, and of course the business as a whole.
Absolutely. And I think there potentially, from an HR perspective as well, there's potentially some discrimination going on there as well. So I think it's, there is a statistic out there that talks about how many people actually think about menopause when they're doing appraisals and and annual reviews, etc. Potentially productivity hasn't been as good as it could have been, but actually has that been taken into account? And I think there will be some discrimination there. What can people do about that?
Well, I think it's a massive problem, not only in the workplace, but if doctors don't know how to deal with menopause, how do people in the workplace know how to deal with it, and managers? And you're right, there is a lot discrimination in different ways. It could be that women are now tarred with this brush of having lots of baggage around middle age, and that maybe they won't be ready for a promotion, and they've got too much demands on their time. Obviously, they might get some issues in their appraisal, or not get the salary increase because they had trouble and perhaps have been absent quite a lot. But there are many, many things that can be done. And what I'm really pleased to see is that organisations are improving the education around menopause, not only for the women themselves, so they know what's happening, but also for the rest of the organisation. So definitely learn more about it. You do not have to be an expert. As a manager, it's really important that you understand it, and that you don't think you know what it is and pretend to know what it is. Oh, is it that hot flush thing? Oh, I know my mum had that and it was terrible. There are so many different symptoms, up to 48, that women can take. Every single woman has a different experience. So I would say education for a start off. Ensure that your company has some risk assessments, or some, as you say, from an HR perspective. It could be things like a work adjustments form or a well-being form that you can talk to those people about, and just give them the confidence to share the real story. Because again, women are scared to do that at the moment, because the culture of organisations just don't allow them to be open. And again, it depends on the leaders of that company. And if you're a leader on this call or watching this video and you're a female, share your story and be as open as you can, because the more open you can be, the more that the women in your business will feel that it's okay to share. And actually, it might only be for a short period of time that they'll be suffering, but at least it gives them that feeling of, I can be honest with my company, they will support me through this, and they have lots of different ways in which they can do that. So definitely get some education and get those forms in place and all those important things, and make the adjustments, change the environment that they're in, and you will see a massive impact on that woman and the people around her, and indeed the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really difficult, isn't it, Emma, because it's long been such a taboo subject, and it's only not become a taboo subject since Davina got hold of it about 18 months ago. And before that, nobody talks about it. People were embarrassed. It was just that thing that happened. And, the women over in the corner, just went a little bit weird for a bit.
You need the fan.
Don't talk about that. You mustn't talk about that. It's too difficult. I don't understand it. So if you talked about the role of a manager. They don't need to be an expert.
No.
They just need to take the time to understand a bit about it, and make adjustments where necessary. But if you are a manager, or if you're a colleague, in fact, and you want to have a conversation with somebody that you think is probably going through the menopause and is probably struggling, and they haven't mentioned anything, they're just plodding along, they're just going to keep going, how do you approach that conversation?
It's a difficult one because we, as you well know, it's all about characters and personalities of individuals. But again, it's the empathy. That's the first to have, is not to pretend to understand, but just to have a really open listening ear, and make sure it's a private place. Obviously, the location's really important. Give that person time to share. Make notes, use any kind of guidance so that she feels listened to. Don't anticipate anything, or I think it's a really sensitive subject, and therefore you have to be guided by the woman herself in terms of how much detail. But if you know a little bit about the symptoms and you know how difficult it is, you can be much more understanding. So I think it's they will be slightly reluctant to disclose some things because it is a personal issue. So if you're a young man, for instance, and you're trying to appraise a senior, a lady in her 40s and 50s, then it's about perhaps understanding it beforehand and reading up on it if you suspect that might be the reason why she's struggling. There are lots of guidance as well for adjustments. So if there's specific physical things that you can help with, then again, it's being allowed to make those adjustments for her to make it easier for her to work.
Yeah, and I think it is difficult to talk about, even if you've got somebody that is happy to talk about it with you. You might not want to say anything, and actually that's where preventative tools come into effect. So for example, in Verve, we have a survey that we're able to give to employees of companies, where they might not want to talk openly about stuff, but actually what they can do is they can click a button and they can answer a question on it, which is I suppose a lot less embarrassing. It's not as it's not as personal, or you can be personal, but you're not in front of somebody. And actually at Verve, we can get people the help that they need, because actually we can identify the issues without you having to mention it to anybody, and then we can get you through to the patient through to a clinician as quickly as possible to deal with any symptoms. So that's another way, I suppose. If
Definitely, and I'm really excited about that, because I think that is the issue initially, as we build the acceptance of talking about not only menopause. I'm a big believer in that. Yes, menopause has come to light and the conversation around it, but as did mental health, and everybody's much more willing to admit that they're struggling in those ways. And I love that about our culture. It is changing, but I think culture within companies is a bit slower in some companies, and that is the fundamental thing. But if you've got tools like that Verve has created, it can be life-changing for some women, because they get the opportunity to actually be truthful without feeling like they're facing somebody on the other side of the desk. And I think that's a really, really important thing to offer people. But culture, creating and fostering an environment, and that has to come from the top, and that's what we're talking about today, is leadership. And leading is not about just leading the business into success and profitability. It's about leading an amazing group of a team of people that are looked after, cared for, and that you as a leader can you know, almost show them how they can behave and be open, and that you're a supportive organisation. So there's various things that you can put in place to show them that you are that sort of organisation. And one of them is to get companies like Verve in, and other companies, you know, their education, but it's finding the right one that suits that particular company. I think is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit beforehand about the menopause policy, and I read the other day some amazing statistics in that something like 3/4 of UK businesses don't have a menopause policy. It's maybe not surprising because it just hasn't been talked about until about 18 months ago, and I think people are starting to put them in. But you know, do people need a menopause policy, or do they need something as part of a well-being policy or as part of their equality policy, I suppose? And if they do need one, what types of things do they need to put in it?
Well, I think it's a very difficult question, that, because menopause policies seem to be one of these box ticking exercises that companies have jumped on. Have a policy, you know, supply some fans, change the uniform, and they tick those boxes, and they might perhaps sign up to having a Headspace app or something like that people can use. And those are all great, but they're not enough. Now, menopause policies, in my opinion, and this is only my personal opinion, you don't need a full-on menopause policy. What you need is as you say, something in a well-being policy that's available to all people, not just women with menopause, but men and other, you know, other people within the organisation that might have some deficiencies or health issues, or you need to treat them all with an open culture. And yes, if you want to put something down in writing, does it need a separate policy? I'm not sure. It needs more importantly, it needs the how are you going to treat that person who is showing issues with performance or absenteeism? What is the process, and how do you go about supporting them? That to me is far more important than writing it in a document and going, great, tick, we're now menopause friendly because we have a policy in place that's locked away in the filing cabinet. And I think more of a well-being approach to across the board, because what we don't want is menopause to become this big thing that it's the only thing we talk about, when actually it's got to be an overarching well-being awareness and looking after our staff. And as you rightly say, even in your first intro, we're talking about proactive health here. We're talking about looking after people in menopause or around menopause, and indeed other things, not waiting for them to get too far and become ill and leave or be absent. And that's where the proactive health and well-being approach has got to be the way forward for menopause as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like you say, we don't want it to become this thing that, you know, is on everyone's lips, and it's made a massive thing of. It needs to just be normal. It needs to be normalized in a way, the same way as, you know, mental health now. It's great that we're all talking about that, but there needs to be a mechanism for people to talk about it. They need to feel comfortable to talk about it. They need to feel comfortable to raise any issues, and as you say, you know, preventative care, trying to talk about things before they become big issues. It's the same whatever you're going through, whether you've got a bad back, or whether you're, you know, dealing with stress, or in fact you're going through the menopause, or you know somebody that's going through the menopause. Picking things up early, and dealing with them then, and finding the techniques to deal with them, makes the world of difference to, you know, to everyone involved, to be fair.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of the questions that we had before we came on the call was around, what if you're a leader and you're going through it? You know, what do you do then? Because, you know, you have got to the point where you're very well respected, you've worked very hard to get to where you are, and then you've got to go through this. How do you manage your team? How do you manage your time? How do you manage your health? What would you say about how a leader can manage the menopause?
Well, again, having gone through it myself, I think I made some mistakes, and you know, I believe honesty and being as open as you can shows leadership. And I remember learning a few years ago, I always used to perceive, you know, being vulnerable as a weakness. And in fact, you know, I believe it's a massive strength. So as a woman who's a leader and who is struggling, it's about owning it. Own it. Share it with your team, share what you're suffering with, and that, you know, you're doing, you know, hopefully you'll have a good understanding of what's happening because you've educated yourself, and hopefully you've been able to access some sort of treatment. Again, it might be nutritional treatment, it might be that you need to look at your lifestyle. So it's not only be honest and own it at work, but take care of yourself. There are things that you as a woman now, if you're going through menopause, you need to do differently. So we evolve every decade, and we have to evolve how we live. And so it might be that you need to reduce your alcohol consumption, or you need to eat different food. You need to be aware that your body is changing, and therefore not only sort of emotionally and psychologically dealing with it, but also physically and what your body now needs. So you might well be vitamin B12 deficient or vitamin D deficient or other deficiencies that contribute to your menopausal symptoms. So it's about, you know, deal with it with your team on this side, but actually look after yourself as well, and be aware of some things that you can do holistically and from a lifestyle perspective will really impact on how you feel, and obviously look out for treatment options as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, owning it, as you say, and talking about it, and actually I suppose maybe letting your team know that, you know, or close members of your team know that that's what you're going through. Actually, that gives them the security, if they're going to go through it at some point, to speak up and to be open about it. And actually, if the leader is owning it properly and doing the right things, as you say, you know, for themselves, actually that gives the team the security and the confidence to do exactly the same, and to think to themselves, you know, I'm not on my own in this. There is the support there. I know somebody that is going through it or has gone through it, that can identify the things, you know, and understand the things that I'm going through. And it just gives them, makes them feel safer. It gives them the confidence to speak out and say, do you know what, I'm really struggling with this. And then that, you know, that open conversation can happen about, I completely know where you're coming from. Actually, these were the techniques that I used. Maybe have a go at these, but, you know, we can put some workplace adjustments in place if you are struggling with certain things. And I think it really is about having that psychological safe space to be able to talk openly about it.
And I think it's more respect. There's more respect. You actually, I wish I'd been a bit more like that earlier on. You know, it just, you know, you don't have to pretend that you're coping with everything in life, and actually being more human and being more honest makes, I think, people respect you more. So I just think try and lose that feeling of, oh, I shouldn't talk about this because I'm a leader and therefore I should have everything in place, because that's not the case. And
no, we're all human. It doesn't matter where we've got to in our career, who we know, which famous people we know, etc., how big our house is. We are all human, and every woman has to go through this. So I think leaders especially need to not beat themselves up about the fact that they're going through it and think that they need to hide it. Actually, they need to be open about it, and as you say, people will respect them far more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we talked about the menopause policy and the fact that people need to, you know, have a think about what they might want to put in it, or whether it's part of an overarching wellbeing policy. But overall, you know, what are we going to do about this? You know, how can we need to change the culture. I think that's very, very clear what we need to do. But just give us some tips on how you think we could change that culture.
Well, going back to being senior women, I think if there are senior women that can share their story. I think that really helps to start that process. I think some line manager training about about not only the functional side of menopause and the content of menopause, so symptoms, etc., but also, you know, some guidance and coaching on how to deal with conversations. So definitely I would put that as part of the policy. I would definitely add a couple of documents in there. Line manager training can be done physically. You've got companies that will come in and do that. I've done quite a few presentations, you know, talking to the managers about different ways they can support. So definitely do something like that. You know, the policy needs to include some documentation, of course, that HR would be responsible for, as I say, the workplace risk assessments and, you know, adjustments and things like that are important. And it's got to come from the top. So a series of education has got to be the starting point through then to make sure it kind of filters in and make it a topic of conversation within management meetings, within your conferences, within any meetings that you're holding with your staff, is just to constantly bring well-being to the front. And of course, menopause is part of the bigger well-being agenda of a company. So yeah.
I think as well, whilst you say it needs to come from the top, there is something about doing it together as well, and actually maybe, you know, including women and men, you know, because they obviously have to, you know, have to deal with partners and they have to work with women that are going through the menopause, but actually asking them what would be useful for them, what would they like to see in a policy, because actually at that point they feel listened to. They have you know, that they have almost built that policy with the company, haven't they?
I mean,
actually
companies do menopause cafes, do bringing the women who feel that they want to talk about it together. I think that's a great, you know, great idea. Is again, it depends on the company. Who's taking the mantle? Is it HR? Is it head of people, head of well-being? There are so many different titles within organizations, but absolutely, if you were to put a questionnaire around or get people around the table and ask them what they felt they wanted to change. I know that James Timpson, for instance, wrote the Timpson shoes. He decided to pay for all of his staff's HRT, a prescription cost, which I thought was a very nice touch. So it depends on the organisation, but I think, yeah, involving people in decisions would be great, depending if that company can pull those people together. I think it's a really good idea.
It's certainly a way of connecting with your workforce, which I think is really, 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 really important. So, you know, if you connect with them, you understand them, they feel more valued, they feel listened to. You are actually, in doing that, you are creating that safe space for things to be talked about. So, you know, there's actually little things like involving them in a policy actually leads to much bigger things, like the things that we've talked about, but like creating that safe space. You know, by doing tiny little things, you affect actually a massive change. And actually that obviously has a change, you know, a change in the culture as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of things that you talked about, which again, it's just making sure it's on the agenda. There's lots of places to share, there's lots of places to talk, there, you know, sharing experiences, there's events, you know, conferences, etc., you know, and then have your training in place. So whether that's employee level or line manager level, as we've mentioned, HR and occupational health are also important that are involved. And then, you know, right down to the detail, and that's working environments and uniforms and you know, temperatures, and is there cold water and what's involved, you know, what's in the toilets, and you know, there's such a vast range, but I think culturally is the biggest challenge, I think, for the whole subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the ways that you can help to change that culture is having a decent wellbeing policy in place, having preventative and proactive tools that people can use. You know, there are apps out there, but there are also companies like Verve that offer services where people can, you know, anonymously answer questions and actually not have to talk openly to colleagues, etc., about things, but then actually be able to be put through to self-help or a clinician to talk to without having to be open with colleagues. So if they don't want to do that, then that's okay. But you know, the culture comes in so many different forms, doesn't it? So some people may wish to be open, some people don't want to, and actually having the tools and the mechanisms for people to get the help that they need, depending on the personality that they are and depending on the company that they work for, is actually really, really important.
Absolutely. And actually the one final thing I would say about all that is, you know, I represent a company, Bodyline Wellness Clinics, who are looking to help support women getting treatment through companies, through occupational health. And I think the one thing, the piece that's missing for me, again, is the treatment side, because the NHS, as we know, is not able to fulfill that at this moment. How long it'll take them to get sorted so that women feel they can get treatment and they're understood and they're listened to, and there's no shortages and all that kind of stuff. Then, you know, what is important for those companies is to find the healthcare partners that can then also, as you say, triage them through into some proper treatment. Because my own experience of having treatment is that it was completely life-changing. And I think that obviously not everybody can take hormone replacement therapy, but there are other things as well. So let's get that treatment out there as well to the women that need it desperately in order to become human again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we've had Emma, we've had a question from one of the people on the call. So how do we broach the topic across other cultures and countries for managers that have global teams? And this could go on for a while, but that's probably quite a difficult question. So how would we do that?
It is a very difficult question. I think from working and talking to companies who have offices in other European countries, for instance, I know that they are way behind us in terms of their acceptance of the topic, and they're still in a place where they don't want to talk about menopause at all, and it is completely against their culture to do so. So, you know, there's a few things. It's either that we have to understand they'll go at their own pace, or that we, if you can build a global team of women that are experiencing this, it's about, you know, continuous education and looking to get that leadership. You will not be able to do it from an HR level, for instance. You won't be able to just sort of try and put the policies into all the other companies and countries. It's got to be culturally done. So it will be having a representation from that organisation, from that country, that can help you to do that. And you will need to use different language. You will need to be very careful. You can't just do one size fits all across the company for definite, because it just won't work, certainly from what I've experienced in talking to big organisations, even with different ownerships. You know, if they're owned by an Asian company, you know, that's again will change the culture and the acceptance that money and resource needs to be put behind it. But it might just take a little bit longer for them to catch up. The UK is seen to be leading the way in menopause treatment in the workplace. And so we're a bit further on. So it is a difficult question to answer, and it has got to be down to people, leaders, and culture.
Yeah, it's small steps, isn't it? It's I suppose, you know, putting a menopause champion into a particular organisation in another country would be maybe the first thing to do. You know, we talked earlier about having menopause cafes. You know, that doesn't need to be a widely advertised thing, but, you know, just a WhatsApp chat, something like that, where women can come together and talk about things and not feel scared to do that. Actually, that's almost a first step. And then when that kind of thing has been successful, actually, it might be worth speaking to, you know, well-being champions, etc., to see whether there's anything else that country can do. And it is difficult because there are different cultures, different religions, etc. Some things are absolutely completely taboo to talk about, but it's finding the ways that women can come together even without a leader, in all honesty, just to talk
to
each other.
I think that, again, lots of companies I've worked with have got groups that they either meet quarterly, monthly, or they have a WhatsApp group, as you say, and that's where they're starting to form ideas and how they can how they can pull together, put proposals to the company as to how they want to feel and what they want to change. But you're so right about well-being champion there. Just pick up on that, because there's mental health champions now in companies. Now they're talking about menopause champions, and I just honestly believe that we need to have well-being. It's a bit like having the health and safety person or the fire alarm person. It's having people that are aware and are prepared to put themselves forward, but also know the company systems and how they can put people in touch with the right people if they're struggling. And those people will be part of these groups. It's got to be tested and seen, and things will evolve over the next year or so. Things will start to change. Companies will get more and more involved in this and will know what they need to do. For me, all the big companies have managed to put quite a lot of funds behind it, but it's the small, medium companies that need the help to know how to deal with this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm hearing is there's a lot of education out there for the bigger companies. As you say, they've got the resources in order to do that, and in fact, actually, some of them are going through to funding specific care for their employees as well. But as you say, it's the small, medium companies that don't necessarily have this, and it's something to really put on their radar. It is small steps, but start off with a menopause champion. Start off with trying to talk about it, popping a part of a menopause policy together, and agreeing with the staff and connecting with the staff and understanding exactly what they think would be beneficial to them, and really involving them in any decisions that are made.
Yeah, I think ultimately, though, those are all brilliant, and I think that companies are starting to do that. But then what happens is that things are done and those policies are done, but then the culture doesn't change. So it's just about making sure that it's a two-pronged attack. Let's do some of the physical changes and maybe the collateral and the training, but the culture is the bigger piece, which needs a lot more effort and work from the leaders.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about culture, Emma, isn't it? It's and it's that enormous thing that people find so incredibly difficult to change. And I'm sure there are 1,000,001 university dissertations on how to change culture. And written down, it looks so easy, doesn't it? But it's just not. It is really, really hard, and that's why I say it's small steps. And actually, it's probably worth people writing down what those small steps are. Bullet point: what do I need to do? What are the little things that I need to do which will help to change this culture? Because you're never in a million years going to do it overnight. No one has ever managed to do that. We're all human beings, and nobody likes change.
That's for sure.
We're all reluctant to it. But actually, this is something that does need to change. And if we come together and work together as workforces, leaders with their teams, actually, you can affect that change actually really, really well. And I'm sure there are a multitude of organisations out there that have managed to do that already. In fact, I've just spoken to a company just now that have so many things in place, because they've recognized it, and they have in fact spoken to the staff. They've done focus groups for women that are either experiencing themselves, or they know somebody that's experiencing them, or they might be perimenopause. They might be coming up to it and thinking, well, actually, I would like the help in place, and this is the type of thing that I would like for me when it does happen to me. And actually, they've been very successful in making sure that the women of that particular age feel included.
And I think the one thing we've not mentioned actually is that it's not just the women. It is, if you are a leader and you've got perhaps a menopausal wife or partner or sister, you know, it's being able to support those people as well. I think it gets overlooked a little bit, and it isn't just women that this is affecting, it is their partners, their other people. And you can imagine if you're at home with somebody who's not sleeping and tossing and turning every night because of hot flushes and night sweats, then you're going to be affected, and that's going to affect your productivity as well.
Absolutely.
So I think it's an exciting time in a sense, because I can see things evolving. I've been in sort of menopause world for a few years, and things have moved on so much so quickly. And I just hope that women will continue to be loud and proud, and to share, help, educate, support other women, and make this, as you say, a normal conversation, part of being a human being. You know, we have got complex bodies after all, us women. We do make other humans. I mean, I know we need help with that, but we do make them. So
we do, and this is, do you know what, this is just the other side of it, isn't it? And I think it's you know, there's lots out there for pregnant women, so maternity, young mums, etc., etc. This is just the other side of it. It's something that we have to go through. No one gets a choice, do they? We have to go through it, and I think that the support needs to be there, and it needs to become more talked about, and not, just not that taboo subject that it has been for all those years.
Well, statistically, again, the average time, so you talked briefly then about perimenopause. So before, I know we're coming to the end now, but perimenopause is before 1 day. So menopause is actually only 1 day, and that is the day in which you haven't had a period for 12 months. But perimenopause is actually where all the problems happen. So that can be anything up to 10 years of a woman's life, averagely 4 to 7. You know, it's a really difficult time. So it's not going to be a quick thing, and you might start to feel it at around about early 40s, where certain things start to change. And it's nothing to get really worried about. You know, we should see this as you say, it's the other side. It's part of the transition from being fertile to being infertile. But it does cause so many issues for women that just need to be recognised and understood.
Brilliant. Emma, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really good chat. It's been very enlightening, and you know, I think we've come out with some actions, certainly for lots of companies, in terms of just, do you know what, just talk about it, see what you can do about changing that culture, be open about things. It's do you know, it's one of those things that happens, that actually everyone has to deal with, not just the person going through it. And as leaders, we can affect change, step by step, and it can make the world of difference for not just the lady going through it, but people around them as well, when they have that safe environment to talk, and that safe culture to talk about it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Pleasure.